Okay, I think it's time. Well, thank you, everyone. I'm sure more and more participants will sign in a little bit by bit. Good to see you, Fuchsia. Um, can I just say hello to everybody from all around the world? And I want to say, I think it's a terrible idea to have all these delicious dishes flashing on the screen, and it's noon my time. So in any event, we hope this conversation will inspire us to want to cook more. So welcome to WildChina On-Air series, our conversation series with experts on China. And today, we're very fortunate to have Fuchsia with us, very prolific writer. Many of you have read many of her books. But first, allow me to say a couple of words about WildChina. My name is May, or just call me Zhang Mei. I'm the founder of WildChina Travel. Yes, we do work in travel, but I've never really sort of thought of us as a travel agency. Instead, I think of us in the business of fostering understanding of China on the human level. Okay, nothing to do with politics or anything. Obviously, right now we cannot travel. So we thought we'd bring China to you to have these conversations, right? So we don't talk about politics. What we talk about is something we all love: food, art, history, architecture, just common things that we all like regardless of borders, right? Now, Fuchsia needs no introduction, really. A lot of you have been probably cooking with her books for years, right? And Fuchsia's path to food is quite unusual, I would say. After graduating from Cambridge, she went to China to really pursue journalism, but eventually she decided to literally follow her nose into the alleyways of the smoking woks, etc. And you know, one thing leads to another. She became the first non-Chinese graduate from the prestigious Sichuan Institute of Higher Cuisine. This sounds like Julia Child to me in some ways, but she eventually built this dazzling career by eating and writing about Chinese food. Now that sounds very, very tasty, easy, and glamorous. Everybody can do it, right? We just eat. But I would say these perceptions cannot be more wrong or further away from the truth. Because I've traveled with Fuchsia. Eating your way through Chinese food may be fantastic for a meal, maybe one day, right? Or 2 days max. But to eat at the level that Fuchsia does, my God, it is really, really hard work. So Fuchsia and I traveled in Yunnan, which is my hometown, and to work on the second itinerary to dive deeper into the regional cuisine. And she literally ate everything like fatty pork, bugs, whatever, the stuff that I would not eat as a Chinese. And she's scribbling constantly. Let me show you a couple of shots that is behind the scene photos. Don't worry, Fuchsia, you've seen some of these. Okay, so this is Dali. When we travel there, it's this absolutely beautiful place, right? But she is like eating everywhere in the field. She's asking, what are they growing? She's checking everything. And this is Fuchsia scribbling away, holding a Yunnan, what do you call that? Snow pea curd snack in her hand. And so to enlarge the scene, these are the Yunnan ladies preparing the food, and she was scribbling away. And at other meal times, this is Fuchsia's notebook. You can ask her later how many notebooks she has. Show us, right? And this lady, this gentleman, Fuchsia basically said, draw the pig. Which part of the pig are we eating? This is the pig, right? So it is extraordinarily fun to travel with Fuchsia. But anyway, so today we're just going to jump into questions. This is how it's going to go. We've collected some questions on Facebook and various social medias. So I'm going to mix those with my own questions. And then later on, we'll have an opportunity to ask questions directly in the Zoom room. Please type your questions on the side, and my colleague might pick them up a little bit later. Okay, Fuchsia. So now we're going to have you on stage. We might need you to unmute yourself. Okay, perfect. So thank you. It's 8 p.m. in London, isn't it? Or what time?
On 8, yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you for taking the time. So to set the stage, I'll start with the first question from one of our audience, Ashley Ong. She said, can you tell us about what drew you to China and how you fell in love with Chinese food? Tell us your story.
Wow, it was quite random. So I loved traveling from when I was very young, and I was keen to go and live abroad and learn a foreign language in a very vague sort of way. And after I left university, I had a sort of sub-editing job where I was reading a lot of material about East Asia. And I got mildly interested in China, and then went backpacking there in 1992 and just had a very fascinating time. And China in 1992, as you all know, May, was so different from the way it is now. And particularly to most Westerners, it just seemed very distant, and, you know, people didn't know a lot about China. And so this first trip was a complete revelation. It was fascinating. I was just sort of gripped. And I came back from that trip and I started learning Mandarin in evening classes. And I started volunteering for a magazine called China Now, produced by the Society for Anglo-Chinese Understanding. And I met a bunch of other people interested in China. And then I applied for a British Council scholarship to study in China.
Yeah.
Now, it wasn't expressly to study food, but the reason that I chose Sichuan University on my application form was, I have to admit, although I didn't admit to the British Council, was partly because I'd eaten very, very well there the year before. And Sichuan had this amazing reputation as one of the sort of gastronomic centers of China. And since childhood, I'd been very interested in cooking and food. And, you know, as a young child, I wanted to be a chef. So I had this sort of interest in food. And that's partly how I ended up in Chengdu in Sichuan. And when I was there, I was one of a bunch of foreign students who were culturally confused, stranded in the middle of China just before email, very little contact with home. And I started by having to concentrate on my Chinese language, which wasn't really good enough to do academic research. And while I was doing that, I just got distracted by the food, because the university was surrounded by, well, there was this lovely little market with a stall selling guokwei, these are old spicy pork pastries, and there were noodle shops selling dan dan noodles, and it was just fascinating. And so I started at first informally asking the owners of restaurants that I was eating with my classmates if I could study in their kitchens. That it was just a very interesting period in China, because the country was just opening up. Most people that we met hadn't really had much contact with foreigners before, so they were very curious. We were very curious about China, and so anything was possible. And so very often the owners of restaurants would say, oh yeah, come into the kitchen, come in, spend as long as you like. Yeah. And so that's how I started. And then a German classmate and I found out about this famous cooking school. Yeah. So we just cycled off there one day and asked if they would teach us. And they agreed to give us a few private classes. And it was such fun. So we just went twice a week for private classes at the school, just for a month or so. And that was my first initiation. And then after that, after I finished at the university, I went back to visit the cooking school, and they invited me to join in with a group of chefs. So that's when I was thrown in with 50 young Sichuanese trainee chefs, 2 of whom were women, all the rest were men. just learning the basics of Sichuan cookery. So it was sort of, in a way, my family and people who've known me a long time, nobody's surprised that I ended up being sucked into the food thing, but that wasn't officially the reason that I was in China, you know.
Yeah, but you know, listening to the story, me in sheltering in place with my teenage kids, I give a lot of credit to your parents for giving you the trust and the free reign to sort of like get distracted, and with a Cambridge degree, put that on the shelf, let you go and, you know, cook in the smoky kitchen.
Yeah, well, in fact, even as a teenager, a lot of my classmates were forced to play the violin and practice the piano thing. But I actually spent a lot of my spare time when I was a teenager cooking. And that's how it started, really.
And just by the way, our speaker before you last 2 weeks ago was Amy Trott,
yes.
the mom.
Yeah, my mother definitely wasn't a tiger mother. She was very relaxed about everything, and a very good cook.
It just shows, you know, many paths to success, right? But if any kid has the diligence that you do with your notebooks and stuff like that, I think, you know, mother should be more relaxed, right? Okay, that's a child-rearing topic on the side. Coming back to food, give us a little, I think some of our audience don't necessarily know China that well. Give us a little sort of overview of the regional cuisines of China that will allow us to understand why you chose Sichuan food and where Sichuan food is sitting in terms of comparing to other parts of the country. I have a map, if that's helpful.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the first thing is just that Chinese food, you know, it's a simple term, but Chinese food is so much more than you could ever possibly imagine from what you taste outside the country. So even now, when after 20 years since China started opening up, we've got a lot more regional cuisines showing their faces in Western cities. So a lot of people now are familiar with Sichuanese food and maybe the, you know, noodly foods of Xi'an in the north, various different regional styles, but it's still just the tip of the iceberg. China is an enormous country, and it's a country that has a particularly rich food culture. Food has always been extraordinarily important in the way people define themselves and the way they relate to each other and to their, you know, in the past, their ancestors. And, you know, China is a very food-centric culture. And it also has this extraordinary regional diversity. So you have everything from Siberian forests in the northeast to tropical rainforests in the south, grasslands, deserts, agricultural plains.
Yeah.
So all these different terrains produce different ingredients, and people have found different ways to cook with them. So it's really, you know, after 25 years of researching Chinese food, I am still discovering new things all the time when I'm in China, constantly.
Yeah.
Which is pretty amazing when you think of the amount of time, you know, and that will go on for the rest of my life. In the way that people define Chinese regional cuisines, there's a convention of dividing it into 4 great regional cuisines, roughly corresponding to north, south, east, and west. So in the north, you have the cuisine of Beijing or Shandong province, which is where Confucius came from.
Beijing.
It's known by various different names. Lu Cai means Shandong cuisine. It's sometimes also called Jing Cai, Beijing cuisine. Mm-hmm. And here's where you have a food culture focused on wheat. So many different kinds of noodles and pastas and breads and dumplings, and quite strong flavors. So garlic and vinegar. And also in the north, a lot of lamb and mutton are eaten. So Beijing up in the north, you have the influence of the nomadic cultures. So for most Chinese people in most parts of the country, pork is the main meat, except for the Muslims. But in North China, sheep meats are very much part of the local cuisine. Yeah. And then in the east, you have the food of the Jiangnan region, sometimes known as Su Cai, which is Jiangsu cooking or Jiangzhou, again, different ways of referring to it. But this region has very dainty and delicate cooking. It's been a sort of center of literary culture and a center of wealth for centuries. Mm-hmm. And one of the interesting aspects of the food of the Jiangnan region is that there are so many water ingredients. So sea fish, river fish, eels, shrimps, crabs, and also water vegetables like water shield, water chestnuts, water bamboo. That's very interesting. And some of China's most famous ingredients like Jinhua ham, Zhenjiang vinegar, very good soy sauces, Shaoxing wine. So this cuisine is also a very kind of literary cuisine. It's where a lot of the great food writers in Chinese history came from. In the south, the Cantonese south, we haven't got Guangdong on the map, but around sort of Guangzhou, Hong Kong, you have the Cantonese style, very delicate flavors, lots of ravishingly fresh seafood, precision cooking, beautiful stir frying and steaming, and of course dim sum, the sort of dim sum that we see some of in the West, which is part of the local culture. And finally in the West, the cuisine of Sichuan. And of course its most famous characteristic is that it's very spicy. And if you're visiting Sichuan from another part of China, people will ask you, "Ni pa bu pa la?" Are you or are you not afraid of chili heat? So the food is quite notorious for being hot, but actually it's much more subtle than that. And in Sichuan itself, people say, "Yi cai yi ge, bai cai bai wei," which means each dish has its own style and 100 dishes have 100 different flavors. And that's really the core of Sichuanese cooking, is this scintillating variety of flavors. So it's not just blow your socks off spicy. You get some dishes which are ma la, numbing and hot with lots of dried chilies and Sichuan pepper, but you also get the yu xiang wei, fish fragrant flavor, where you have gentle heat of pickled chilies, ginger, garlic, spring onion, bit of sweet and sour, and lots of dishes that are not hot. Like another classic flavor of Sichuan is jiang wei, which is a ginger juice flavor. No chili in it at all. It's just sort of ginger and vinegar, very delicate flavor. So yeah, I mean, but this is, the four great cuisines, so-called, is a terrible oversimplification, because within the sort of spicy Western cuisine, you also have the food of Hunan, you have Guizhou, you have Yunnan, all very spicy and fascinating and all totally distinct. So in some ways, it's completely crazy to lump them all in as just one of the four regional cuisines.
Yes, so I'm from Yunnan. I'm not heartbroken that Yunnan is not one of the four classic cuisines, but I'm curious, what would you say about Yunnan cuisine compared to Yunnan is right here, south of?
Well, I mean, the thing about Yunnan that is completely staggering is that, I've already said that China is so diverse in terms of its geography and its food cultures, but Yunnan, even though it's just one province, it's got this extraordinary diversity of culinary traditions. So you have some areas that are mountainous, you have some areas that are tropical, you have different ingredients. So I was in December in Xishuangbanna on the southern border, near the borders with Vietnam and Laos. Yeah. And there the food is really, it's very far away from the cuisines of inner China, really. Completely different traditions and a lot in common with the food of Thailand and Laos. Southeast Asian flavors, ingredients, many, many local ingredients that you don't get anywhere else in China. And then, and then you go to Dali, as you know, May, which is completely different. Yeah. Again, the ingredients that are grown there are utterly distinct from Xishuangbanna. It could be another country. Yeah. And this is within one province. So in a way, Yunnan is one of the most difficult to come up with even the simplest stereotype of, because, you each place you go will have its own flavors and dishes.
Yeah. And it's just so sad we can't go right now. Mushroom season. Mushrooms are wild mushrooms.
Yeah.
Amazing.
But it is extraordinary. I mean, just the number of ingredients that don't even have names in English. Yeah. And that you don't find in other parts of China. It's astonishing.
Yeah, yeah. So we have another question that's very similar along this line, is from Daniela Beauchamp. She said, would you encourage a timid Chinese cook to jump into Sichuan cooking or start somewhere else? Safe.
Oh, well, I mean, no, I don't. I think that Sichuan food has something for everyone. It's just that, you know, people sometimes get intimidated by Chinese cooking. But actually, Chinese cooking, yes, you can have elaborate banquet cuisine, but Chinese cooking is also what people just rustle up for dinner at home every night. And one of the great joys for me of being in China is simple home cooking, just basic, a few vegetable dishes. It's economical, it's very healthy, it's very delicious, and you don't need to be very skilled to sort of start learning about it. In fact, one of my cookbooks, Every Grain of Rice, was deliberately written about everyday Chinese home cooking, and that book has been probably my most popular. And I know a lot of people who have never cooked Chinese before who've started with that book, got a few basic seasonings, learnt a few basic techniques, and then find they're cooking Chinese food all the time.
Terrific. Can you, I know you're in your study, but can I bother you to show us some of the very, very basic essential collection of tools and spices to get started with your a grain of rice?
Well, a cleaver, a knife, and that is not my favorite. I mean, this is sort of the thing I really can't live without. So, and the really funny thing is that I think a lot of Westerners and difficult to use, but whenever I'm doing a cooking demonstration, I ask people to hold the knife and handle it, because it's actually pretty light and delicate. And this is actually a caidao vegetable knife, and it's good for, you know, you can slice a tiny clove of garlic with it as well as a great hunk of meat, and it's definitely not for chopping through bones. But the funny thing about this knife is that I've known quite a few people, once you start using it, you won't want to use any other knife. And it's partly for the cutting. It's also very safe because you can actually, the way you hold it, you have your knuckles against the wall of metal and tuck your fingertips behind. And so you've got this wall of metal kind of protecting your fingertips as you cut. I tend to cut myself more with European knives than with this one. But also when you've sliced up your garlic or ginger on the chopping board, you can use the knife to scoop it up off the chopping board. And that's something that makes this particularly useful. So, and then the other thing is, you know, a wok scoop is very useful for chasing food around the wok and turning it. And this is one that I bought in Hong Kong, which has a very nice, I mean, I just love the weight of it. Yeah. And wartan.
I love the word you used, chasing food around the wok.
Yes. And then the other thing is, and at home, people normally use that kind of wok scoop, but restaurant chefs usually use a big ladle. And that's because, as well as moving food around in the wok and tossing it, you can also use it to mix up your sauces, to ladle oil or water or stock into the cooking pot. So it's very versatile. And this one I bought in Sichuan about 20 years ago. And I think it's a handmade one, and it's just got a particularly nice weight, and I haven't seen such a beautiful ladle for a long time. So that's something I use a lot. And then chopsticks, not just for eating, but for fishing food out of hot oil or water, for tasting, for stirring, you can even whip egg whites with a pair of chopsticks. That's what we used to do at the cooking school. And I like the really simple old-fashioned ones. So these ones are from the Bamboo Sea in southern Sichuan. Really simple, but they feel lovely for eating or for cooking.
One thing I do want to say about is the pan, the wok. It
Yes.
frustrates me when I go cooking in a household that doesn't do Chinese cooking. Like
Yes.
these pancake pans, just so difficult.
Yeah. So I got my wok as well.
I love it.
This is a wok. I bought this in Chinatown in London about 20 or maybe even longer ago, and it's just really nice. It was very inexpensive. It's just a carbon steel wok with a wooden handle. But yeah, so it just that you know, the high walls of a wok mean that you can move the food around when you're stir frying without it jumping out of the sides, which happens when you try and use a regular frying pan or a skillet, right?
Yeah.
And also, if you season the surface of the wok, then you actually have a non-stick surface for stir frying. So it's just, and one of the things I love about Chinese cooking is that it's so simple, that these bits of kit, none of them are very fancy or expensive, and you know, you can use them forever and they can do everything. So with the wok, it's not just for stir frying. You can also use it for steaming, for deep frying. You know, it's very versatile.
You start to sound like my dad, who travels just
Sorry about
one cleaver and one wok and one spatula. That's it.
I've been doing some volunteer cooking for during the COVID pandemic, and this is the cleaver I've been taking with me, which is a very nice. That's one without a wooden handle. That's cast all in one piece. But with that, I feel I can do anything.
Very nice, very nice. Now, what about spices? Do you have suggestions for a very, very minimalist, basic collection of must-have spices?
Well, so I mean, in terms of seasonings generally, the particular seasonings that you need for a basic Chinese setup, you need soy sauce, obviously. And soy sauce, often now people sell the Cantonese light and dark soy sauce. The light soy sauce is for salty and umami flavorings, and the dark soy sauce normally for color. So if you want a very dark caramel brown. But you need some soy sauce. You need a good vinegar. And there are many different Chinese vinegars, but one of the ones that is very readily available is the Jajang vinegar, Qingqiang vinegar, it says on the label, which is made from glutinous rice and is a dark brown color. And that's quite convenient, quite easy to find in the West. So I recommend that for a Chinese pantry. And then sesame oil. Mm-hmm. Use it in small quantities, Chinese toasted sesame oil for fragrance. Shaoxing wine is very useful in marinades. And then apart from that, if you want to do Sichuanese cooking, then you need your basic spicy seasonings. So dried chilies, Sichuan pepper, and doubanjiang, which is the fermented chili and fava bean paste. Mm. And that's what gives a dish like mapo tofu, its wonderful, rich, savory intensity and heat and that red color.
Oh, I'm already like ready to go to my kitchen. Now, tell us, what is your favorite or simplest Chinese dish that you cook often for yourself at home? Is it something, particularly right now in COVID-19, sheltering in place?
Well, yeah, I mean, I say I work from home a lot, and also during the lockdown, I make a lot of Chinese noodle dishes.
Yeah. So
dan noodles, extraordinarily delicious and very easy. So with dan noodles, it's traditionally served with a minced meat topping. So I normally make a bit of that and then put it in the freezer in small amounts, and then just take out a little bit, and then all the seasonings I have ready, and then you can whip up dan noodles very, very quickly. And then also Shanghainese Kaiyang Congyou Ban Mian. So this is noodles there was a picture in the lead up to this event that you had going across the screen. Shanghainese chilies with spring onion and dried shrimp oil. Totally delicious and very easy to make. So my sort of go-to recipe is often a noodle dish and then a vegetable dish. So I might do a smacked cucumber salad, which takes about 5 minutes to make.
Yeah.
Maybe a simple stir-fried green vegetable, spinach, water spinach, pak choy, something like that. And that's a really healthy and balanced meal.
Yeah. So give us a few tricks of like, stir fry a green vegetable. I think for those in China, we're very used to it, but some useful tips on what we can do.
Well, I mean, I think one of the mistakes that people often make if they're not used to Chinese cooking is overloading a wok, because a domestic cooker is not normally that hot. And if you fill up your wok with a huge amount of leafy green vegetables, the heat isn't really enough to sort of break them down quickly and get that lovely heat that you want for a stir fry. So I would say don't overload your wok. Don't try to cook too much at one time. With a stir fry, what you typically do is you heat a little oil and then you add some aromatic seasonings. So that might be ginger, garlic, chili, Sichuan pepper, fermented black beans, and you sizzle them gently in the oil to bring out their flavors. And then you add your green vegetable and you toss it till everything is incorporated, until the vegetable is wilted. If the vegetable is a bit fleshy, sometimes it's good to blanch it first. So just dunk it in boiling water and then drain it well. And that will help again to break down the volume and make it easier and quicker to stir fry.
Which ones do you do that? Which vegetables do you do that? The blanching?
Oh, water spinach. I mean, it depends how much, the volume of the vegetable and so on. It's a slightly different effect, but yeah, it's a way of being able to stir fry well in a domestic wok as well.
Uh-huh.
So yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Now, the next question is what we all want. List. We want your list of the best restaurants. If we don't cook at home, once the lockdown's over, where do you go? Top 3 favorite restaurants in London?
Oh, in London. Well, the place I'm missing most of all is Royal China Club for dim sum. Royal China is a chain of restaurants and they're all very good. In fact, there's a lovely Royal China down by the river in East London, which does very good dim sum. And then the Royal China Club, which is a slightly more upscale version. Delicious dim sum, best in London. So that's where I'm going to be going like a shot as soon as they open. And then another favorite place in London is Master Wei, which is run by a young female chef from Xi'an, which does handmade biang noodles, rojia mo, the sort of so-called Xi'an hamburger, flatbread stuffed with pulled pork. And it's just a lovely place, a very personal restaurant, not at all corporate, but run by someone who really cares about the food of her hometown. So those 2, I think they're the Chinese restaurants that I'm most keen to go back to.
How in New York?
Ooh, New York. Oh, well, there's a very nice, there are a very interesting couple of Chinese people living in New York. You have a few restaurants called Cafe China. Is it Cafe China or China Cafe? I always forget. Cafe China and China Blue and Birds of a Feather in Brooklyn, doing very nice Chinese food. So China Blue is more Shanghainese style, and the others are more Sichuanese, but those places are very nice.
Now, jumping all the way back to China, which are the places in Beijing that you would always go?
Well, I think, yeah. Well, it's more, I think there's more sort of dishes that I want to have every time I go to Beijing. So Peking duck, for sure. You want to have Peking duck. You can't go to Beijing without Peking duck. And jiaozi, shui jiao, simple boiled dumplings with a dip of vinegar and soy sauce, completely essential. And Jajang Noodles, which is it's like the Beijing equivalent of spaghetti bolognese. So it's fresh hand-pulled noodles with a very dark sauce of minced pork and sweet fermented sauce with fresh vegetables all tossed together, and that's very delicious. So the two, the shui jiao and the Jajang mian, are really like Beijing sort of everyday cooking. And then Peking duck is more fancy. And there's also the scalded mutton hot pot, sometimes called a Mongolian hot pot, although it's not Mongolian, which is particularly good in the winter, where you have a wonderful copper hot pot with a simmering moat of water around a chimney, which in the traditional restaurants has some glowing embers in it to heat the water. And then you use your chopsticks to cook very thinly sliced mutton in the moat of water, and then dip it into sesame paste to eat. And that's really fun and very Beijing, and it's so atmospheric to eat that dish in Beijing in the winter when it's freezing cold.
Yeah, I can't help but noticing the fun choice of words that you use constantly, like moat of the hot pot. I've never ever thought of that as a moat, but it's fantastic. Okay, so now I'm going to switch to talk a little bit about the evolution of Chinese cooking. I live in California, so here we're all about gluten-free, oat milk, and all of these. Is it possible to stick to this kind of diet while traveling in China, or is it necessary at all? Like, what is your view?
Sorry, which kind? Gluten-free?
Well, if it's allergy related, there's a new fad of no starch, oat milk, anti-inflammatory kind of foods. What is your view on these sort of dietary restrictions that are not allergy based?
That are not allergy based. Oh well, I'm a sort of total shameless omnivore. I mean, as you've said, May, I like to eat everything, and I also find that it's interesting to experience a place through food, and if you do that, you want to be as open as possible to see what people are eating there and how they eat it, and that is the way to experience China fully. And I do feel that, I mean, I'm not in favor of sort of faddish diets. Like I try to, as far as possible, eat a balanced diet of everything and not criminalize certain specific ingredients. And also, I think that just as a food system, that one of the things that has impressed me most deeply is that that in China there's this extraordinary tradition of eating for health and of understanding how to restore and nourish your body through diet. And so Chinese people talk all the time about what they should be eating to suit the season or the way they're feeling or the symptoms they're experiencing. And that's something that I've adopted myself. And I have often treated mild illnesses with Chinese dietary kind of principles and found it very effective. So I think one of the weird Western stereotypes of Chinese food is, or has been, that it's unhealthy. You know, a lot of people in the West have experienced Chinese food through takeout food, which is very tasty, but it's deep fried, and it doesn't tend to have all the fresh vegetables, which, as you know, May, are such an important part of real Chinese diets. So yeah, and back to your original question, that I think, you know, in many restaurants in China, the food is still freshly prepared to order. So theoretically, you can ask people to cook you something without adding garlic, or you can have the food tailored to your requirements. But I think if you don't have to, it's a shame not to let people show you the food that they think is good, you know?
Yeah. And is there, the Chinese cooking has been so classic. You know, I cook the same way that my grandma, my dad cook. But is there room for innovation in Chinese cooking, do you think?
Totally. And I think Chinese food has been very innovative. And I think that the best example of that is really the chili, which is a foreign American import, which totally changed the face of Sichuanese cooking and the food of many other regions. And I think that you see it today in China, that in the last 20 years, there are all these new ingredients that have become available that people are using in cooking, and just a couple sort of, you know, asparagus, broccoli, salmon, more recently okra, beef has become more important. So ice plant, this strange crunchy vegetable from Russia, which is suddenly on menus everywhere, and bean tar.
Bean tar.
It's like a raw vegetable that it looks as though it's covered in ice crystals and it's got a really crunchy mouthfeel. But yeah, so I think people are very innovative, and you know, to a certain extent, maybe you know, you feel what we always feel, that our grandmothers cook the way that they always cooked and there's something eternal about it. But then our generation, when we're grandmothers, then it'll already have moved on and be something different. So I think that you know, China has a, you know, it's always been evolving and adapting to new technologies and new ingredients and new cultural influences.
Yeah, fantastic. I see there are so many questions in the chat room, so I'm probably going to switch to those shortly. But before we do that, let me address one of the questions about Fuchsia's trip. As you all know, Fuchsia leads 2 trips a year with WildChina's clients and Fuchsia's big fans. This year, unfortunately, it may not happen, but we don't know. 2021, we're absolutely hoping to pull it off, and Fuchsia actually has committed more time because we'll have a backlog of bookings from this year. So in the coming year, let me show you the dates if anyone's interested. But I'll have a question for you, Fuchsia. Think of an interesting story on the trip of how you introduce the travelers to Chinese food on the road. So these are the dates. Yeah, take note. If you want to join, email info at.
I've just seen that Tim and Mo, who've come on both tours of mine, the gastronomic tour in 2014 and Yunnan in 2016. So hello, Tim and Mo, nice to see you again. Yeah, well, I absolutely love leading the tours. And I think the thing that gives me more satisfaction than anything else is that most people who come on them have a totally different view of Chinese food by the end of the trip than they did at the beginning. And I think, you know, obviously most of the people who come, they already have a very positive view of Chinese food. But as I've said, you just cannot imagine how exciting it is and how diverse until you experience it. And so the whole point of each trip is, you know, I choose the restaurants and I order the food, and I try to show everyone as many different facets of the cuisine of the place we're in as is possible. So different ingredients, different cooking methods, different styles of cooking, you know, banquet cooking, street food, vegetarian cooking. So trying to explain it all and the cultural background, and also to I hope to deepen people's appreciation of how to eat Chinese food, because there are, I mean, for example, if you're a Westerner, you probably won't have a very developed experience and sense of mouthfeel, kogan, of the textures of food, because it's something that's just less important in Western food traditions. But in China, people, you know, the texture of food, the kogan, the mouthfeel, is as important as the taste and the aroma and the appearance. And so I think as a foreigner, as I did in the early days, you really have to address this, and you have to open your mind and your palate to a different and deeper way of experiencing food. And that's something as well that I really want people to take away from the trips, is a sort of sense that there's this whole other dimension of gastronomy that you can discover through opening yourself out to Chinese food.
Yeah. Now let's switch to the questions from the chat room. Fuchsia, would you like to look at some of these and pick, or I know Joyce, my colleague, has been looking at them.
Oh, right.
I got one private chat from Jameson Crosby. Says, what do you think of the YouTube sensation like Li Ziqi or Dianxi Xiaoge?
Oh, right. Well, I mean, I think I don't really watch much YouTube, but I think that they're sort of giving people outside China a real sense of the beauty of the Chinese countryside and of Chinese culinary traditions, and seem to be extraordinarily influential. So that's great.
Yeah, me too. As you are looking, I see from our earlier submitted question, there's Jerry Crossan, your Cambridge alum, asked about Do you think COVID-19 lockdown will have the same dramatic effects on restaurants in China as in Europe, and I would add United States?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. So I think that clearly the period that we're in at the moment, there are very drastic changes, but it's not entirely clear where we'll go from here. But I have been in touch with friends in Hong Kong where it's quite interesting. They had, restaurants restricting people to only 4 diners in a party and social distancing. And now the number has been raised to 8. So things are getting a bit back to normal. Mm-hmm. There's also been a lot of discussion in mainland China about about the use of gongquai, of public chopsticks, when you have serving chopsticks, and instead of, as in the traditional way, using your own chopsticks to help yourself to food from central dishes. So with, in 2003, during the SARS epidemic, I was actually living in China, and people talked a lot about using the public chopsticks and about not dipping their own chopsticks into food, but it didn't really settle in. There was a period when everyone was very nervous about it, but then afterwards, people went back to the old habit, which for informal meals is using your own chopsticks. So I don't know. I mean, maybe this will be a moment when, the etiquette of using chopsticks and serving people and serving yourself changes. We've just got to wait and see. But I really hope, I mean, one of the delights of eating in China is the kind of table groaning with dishes, shared food, this kind of communal atmosphere. And I do hope that we won't have lost that for too long.
Yeah, indeed. We hope we can come back to our gatherings. Okay, let's get a little bit more. Joyce, are you seeing some questions that you want to pop in and help the audience to ask?
Question from Mei Li Feng. Do you use the same wok for steaming as for all other cooking? Kind of the answer to that is both yes and no. So you can do, because the basic round bottomed wok, you can use it for stir frying, for deep frying. If you put a steamer in it or a little rack in it with a lid, you can then use it for steaming. But as you will see, there are different styles of wok. The one that I showed you just now has one long handle on the side. And I find that a very good wok for stir frying, because it's easy to hold the wooden handle and to sort of toss the wok. Whereas for steaming or deep frying, I actually tend to use a wok that has a handle on either side, 2 so-called ears on either side of the wok, because it's more stable, and because you want to be really careful if you have a wok full of boiling water or boiling oil that it's stable. So I tend to use, that's about the handles rather than the actual wok. And also, I have a larger wok where I can steam a whole fish in one piece. But I would say basically you only need one wok. But if you're cooking Chinese food all the time and you do a lot of deep frying and steaming, then maybe you'll want a couple.
Yeah, when we were growing up in this farmhouse, we always had this gigantic wok that does all the work.
Yeah, the one that's sort of built in. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I'll just answer one of the questions from Craig Hines. Would there ever be a tour include Dali in the area with focus on ham and pork? Yes, that's almost like a question tossed at me. Yes, we have a trip. It's called Travels Through Dali with a Leg of Ham. I lead that trip. But I would say if you can go with Fuchsia, go with her. She's very particular. Fuchsia, per table, we can only take 11 people on each trip, because the goal is to be able to sit around the table and chat. So I would go on her trip. But come with me, then we sort of eat with the locals and chat with my family and that kind of stuff. It's slightly different. Thank you. And one more question there. Some audience, I think, know China very well. They want to hear some comments on Guizhou cooking and Hunan cooking.
Right. Well, so Hunan, I lived in Hunan for a while, and what amazed me most all about, so I went to Hunan when I had been spending about, how many years? And I had already spent, I don't know, nearly 10 years exploring Sichuan, and then I went to Hunan for the first time, and I thought it would be very similar, another spicy cuisine, but it's actually totally different. So the style, like Hunan food, they don't really use Sichuan pepper. They use this particular pickled chili called Jiao, which is chopped salted chilies in many dishes. They really like savory and hot dishes and flavors, and sour and hot flavors, but they don't have that element of sweetness, which is so important in Sichuanese cuisine. And lots of very particular dishes. They have wonderful smoked bacons and cured meats in Hunan, yeah. Delicious. And yeah, so Hunan is a province with a totally different character from Sichuan, and many different dialects actually. So yeah, famously Chairman Mao's home province, and he always liked the sort of hearty, rustic cooking of his hometown. And if you go to Shaoshan, which is his hometown, his home village, there are lots of restaurants serving that kind of country food that he liked so much. And then Guizhou is a region that I know much less well than Sichuan and Hunan, but they have another particular kind of chili, which is very important, the Ciba Lajao, which is a sort of chili paste made by soaked chilies, which are pounded with garlic and sizzled in oil. So you get these wonderful sort of rich, thick chili sauces in Guizhou cooking. Again, lots of chilies and garlic. Yeah. But I think, I mean, Guizhou, like Yunnan, is a province which has various different ethnic groups and lots of beautiful, unspoilt rural areas. So it's certainly a place I'd like to go back and investigate more.
And the landscape is beautiful, the different ethnic groups.
Yes.
And the Guizhou we're talking about is right here. It's to the east of Yunnan, right here. Okay.
A cooking question from Craig Hines again, saying, how do you replicate the intense heat source of professional Chinese kitchens in a home kitchen, I guess he's saying? Well, you can't really. So in a restaurant, you often have a cooker, you know, that is like a volcano, and it's so hot that you can do a stir fry in just seconds. And you have to be absolutely on the ball. You need to be, you know, if you don't pay attention, then you'll burn things because it's so hot and it's so fast. You're not going to get that kind of heat in a home kitchen. But there are a couple of things that you can do to maximize the potential of your home cooker. One of them is to make sure that your wok is really hot before you start cooking in it. So obviously when you add your ingredients to the wok, then it's going to cool it down a bit. But if you have the wok really hot before you add your cooking oil, then you get a kind of head start. And the other thing that I said already is just don't overload a wok. Like if you're making gongbao chicken and you want to make a lot of it, just do it twice. Don't do double portion of gongbao chicken, or the heat won't be enough to cook it properly. So just sort of don't try and strain the heat beyond its capability. Yeah, but one other thing is that it's now becoming possible to get induction cookers, which can take a wok. And with induction, you can get much more powerful heat, which is fantastic. I don't actually have an induction cooker, but if I had room in my kitchen, I would love to have one as well as the gas cooker. With an induction cooker, you have to change your technique slightly, because in a traditional wok, the heat source is at the bottom, and it's very hot at the bottom, and it's getting less around the sides of the wok. So there are some techniques where, for example, you might be stir frying a bit of meat and you push the meat up the side of the wok, and then you let the oil pool in the bottom, and then you put in some chili paste or something and sizzle that in the oil, and then you mix everything together. And you can do that because the sides of the wok are a bit less hot, right? With an induction cooker, the heat is all the way around the wok, so you can't do that. So you can't toss it, because as soon as you remove the wok from induction cooker, then you lose the heat. So you can't toss the wok. So, with that caveat, actually induction heat is very good for stir frying, but you just have to be aware of these little differences.
Okay, this actually prompted a personal question. I have a wok that is very thin metal and another one that's cast iron. The cast iron one holds heat really well, but it's impossible to toss. And Chinese cooking, you wash the wok after every dish, almost. So what is better? Like,
it's not what's better or not. It's just that, the heavy cast iron one will hold heat more, but it means that you can't cool it down quickly. So for example, with a thin carbon steel wok, if you're sizzling something, some chili bean paste, and you think it's a bit hot, you can just turn the heat right down or take it away, and it cools down very quickly so you don't burn it. Whereas if you're in a cast iron wok and it's really hot, and you can't reduce the heat quickly either. Yeah. So I think you just have to know your wok and know how it behaves, and then you can cook accordingly.
Yeah. While you look at the questions, let me address one question. Li Ziqi and Dianxi Xiaoge recipe. I haven't watched the Li Ziqi. The question is, they're cooking traditional. I have not watched Li Ziqi, but I know I watched the Dianxi Xiaoge. It is actually very authentic. A lot of the way she does things is the way we do things back home. Mm-hmm. So it is quite authentic, I would say. Mm. You picked up more questions? I think
so we saw Neelam Srivastava saying, is it okay to use olive oil as a cooking medium? And I would say, no, I wouldn't use that for Sichuanese cooking. I would not use olive oil because it has a lower smoke point. So if you heat it too hot for stir frying, then it's not going to work. You want to have an oil with a high smoke point for stir frying. And the other thing is that a lot of olive oils have quite an assertive flavor, which is, I would be inclined to use a more neutral cooking oil or one that is within the Sichuanese tradition. So I wouldn't recommend olive oil. I have sometimes used olive oil in cold dishes, which is, that's quite fusiony, but is more suitable because you're not heating it to high temperatures.
Okay, I think because we're live broadcasting this on Facebook as well, Joyce, my colleague, says there are some questions there. Joyce, do you want to jump in and talk about one or two questions there?
Sure. Hi, Fuchsia. Hi, May. Thanks so much for the talk. So we've got some questions from Facebook. Leland Yu asks, what are your 3 favorite Sichuanese dishes?
Me? Oh.
So, I guess.
Well, sorry, May or me? Sorry, I was just reading questions.
I think it could be addressed to both.
Okay. Do you want to say, May? Why don't you go first?
Okay. Dan Dan mian for sure. And yuxiang qiezi is my next one. I love qiezi. And probably I would say ganbian sijidou. The next. Yeah, I lean towards more vegetarian, but
right.
What about you?
Well, yuxiang qiezi, fish fragrant, eggplant, aubergine, that's one of my all-time favorite dishes. And I don't think I've ever met anyone who hasn't fallen in love with that dish. So that one also, that's one of my recipes that I'm most proud of because I made it so many times to try and get the right formula, and I love that dish. So the fish fragrant aubergines, mapo tofu.
Oh yeah.
Marked old woman's tofu is just sensationally good, and once you've made it once or twice, it's very easy. And I actually often make the vegetarian version, so traditionally it's made with a bit of minced beef, ground beef, but actually even without that it's delicious. So that I mean, I love suan la dou hua, the sour and hot silken tofu, which is a really easy dish to make, and the dan dan noodles, which again I make all the time at home. But I mean, there are so many delicious dishes in Sichuan, it's quite hard to pick. Also, actually, so this is way more than 3. Gongbao chicken, amazing layering of flavors, quite easy to make, but a very complex and delicious dish.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm afraid I think we're running out of time. Any last few words, Fuchsia, you want to share with us?
I'll just say that I'm just sort of, it's such a strange period. I'm sure it is for you, May, as well, that we're both used to traveling so much. I spent most of last year going all over China, eating lots of incredible things and extending my knowledge. And it's just, it's a very strange period, not knowing when I'll go back and missing places, missing people, and just, but feeling this connection with all, I mean, I don't know. It's just, yeah, I'm longing to go back, already getting itchy feet.
Yeah, but I know this downtime for Fuchsia is good because that means the next book will come to market faster, right?
It means I'm actually, tied to my desk doing some actual work rather than just eating, which is quite a good thing.
I think for you, eating is a lot of work. Anyway, so Fuchsia, thank you so much for taking the time, and everybody, thank you for taking the time to join us. Now, before we rush off to the kitchen, for those who want to review or share with friends, today's session is recorded and the conversation will be available on YouTube, WildChina channel. And
Can I just show my book as well, the latest book?
Yes, please.
So this is The Food of Sichuan, which is the most recent one, which just won the Fortnum and Mason Cookbook of the Year award. And that's, that's my kind of love letter to Sichuan after all these.
Oh, congratulations. Beautiful cover, by the way. And I love your Instagram photo of the onion, similar to this cover, right?
It's so funny. I didn't notice when I did it that it was the same pattern as the cover, but a lot of people pointed out. Yeah.
And so follow Fuchsia on Instagram. She's an inspirational sensation on Instagram. Just pre-show for next session, we're going to have a book reading with Paul French, also from London. And he's going to talk about completely switch of subject. We're going to talk about murders of old China. And it's available on audible.com. Download that now, and so we can chat. And if you don't want to miss future events, go to our website, wildchina.com, to sign up for our newsletter. I think now, for those in Europe, time for a night snack. And for us, I'm going to go cook dandamian for lunch. Thank you.
We have done Yan for a midnight feast after all this talking about food. Yeah.
Isn't it great? It's like it works all day long, 24/7.
I know.
Breakfast as well.
I know.
All right. Thank you, Fuchsia. It's always so fun chatting with you. And thanks, everybody. Thank you, WildChina team as well. Everyone.
Right.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.